Hello, testing. Yeah, I'm about to. Good morning. My name is Lisa Pullen, and I'm co-president of the UNC School of Public Health Minority Student Caucus. I would like to welcome all of you, those here in the audience, and those with us via telecast and internet, to the 23rd Annual Minority Health Conference, Race, Class, and Environment, the State of Minority Health. I would like to thank Conference Chair Melissa Green and all members of the Planning Committee who have worked hard for many months to make this event possible today. The Minority Student Caucus was founded in the early 1970s to address the concerns of minority students and to attract more students of color to the School of Public Health. The Minority Student Caucus is an organization open to all students, faculty, and staff associated with the School of Public Health who are interested in issues that impact minority populations. We are very active in many areas and sponsor numerous events throughout the year in addition to the annual Minority Health Conference. Some of these events include REACH, a recruitment event to encourage students to pursue careers in public health, a graduate student mentoring program, community service projects, and various professional development workshops. To learn more about the UNC School of Public Health Minority Student Caucus, please visit us online by accessing the UNC School of Public Health homepage. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. William L. Roper, Dean of the UNC School of Public Health. In the time that I've been here, Dean Roper has demonstrated a firm commitment to students of color and minority health issues. He has listened and responded to student concerns, provided financial resources, and taken time out of his very busy schedule to support student activities. In addition to supporting our organization, Dean Roper is very accomplished, and let me highlight some of his accomplishments. Dean Roper is a professor of health policy and administration in the School of Public Health and a professor of pediatrics in the School of Medicine. Before coming to UNC, Dr. Roper was director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, senior vice president for the Prudential Center for Healthcare Research, administrator of the Healthcare Financing Administration responsible for Medicare and Medicaid, and served on the senior White House staff. Dean Roper also serves on various prestigious boards throughout the United States. Without further ado, I present Dean William L. Roper.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you all here and to tell you how important this conference is, to recognize Bill Small, and I know that his leadership in getting this program underway and sustaining it over the now more than 2 decades will be highlighted later, but I want to recognize Bill and his being with us this morning. The purpose of this program is to look at the issues of race, class, and the environment. And I just want to take 1 minute and tell you a little bit about what's going on our campus in addition to this conference. Last fall, we had an organizational brainstorming session to bring together people across campus to talk about putting in place a structure for us to work more effectively on issues of ethnicity, culture, and health. That brought together 80 or so people from all parts of campus, health and arts and sciences, the business school, law school, social work, and so on. It was a very successful effort. And just this Monday, earlier this week, we had the first of the steering committee meetings for what we, at least for planning purposes, are calling the Program on Ethnicity, Culture, and Health here on our campus. One of the outcomes of that steering committee session was the affirmation by the group as a whole that the leaders from the School of Public Health, the School of Medicine, and other units are the right people in place to take this program forward and to accomplish the very important things that need to be done, not only in research and teaching, but also service, outreach, practice activities, if you will, in the area of minority health. So we are committed to making progress throughout the university, but in particular in the School of Public Health, and welcome the chance to be a part of this annual, now 23rd annual Minority Health Conference. So thank you very much for being here, and I salute the efforts of the Planning Committee to bring together the distinguished speakers and other leaders that are going to be a part of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Roper. I would now like to introduce Dr. Archie Irvin, Assistant to the Chancellor and Director of the Office of Minority Affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Irvin has a long history of reaching out to students of color and has worked in higher education for more than 20 years. During his career, he has taught courses in political science, public policy, and public administration. Dr. Irvin is a senior advisor to the Chancellor on minority presence and diversity issues, and his office is currently developing a university-wide blueprint for diversity that is designed to build and sustain a campus climate that supports members of the university community. It is my pleasure to present Dr. Archie Irvin.
Good morning, everyone. I had an opportunity late yesterday to be talking to the Chancellor, James Measer, and I mentioned to him that I would be here this morning, and unfortunately he could not be here due to obligations that he had to attend to this morning. So he specifically asked me, and I guess as an assistant to him, I guess he directed me to say welcome on his behalf and on behalf of the entire university community. I am pleased that Lisa and the Planning Committee invited me to be a part of this, a small part of this conference again. Having been around this campus for a little more than 16, 17 years, I was here when it was somewhat in its early days, and would like to remind all of those who are here that Bill Small played no small part in getting this conference to where it is today, and we're so very thankful for all the things that you have done and continue to do, Bill, so thank you again. The School of Public Health itself is to be commended for continuing this very, very important event. As we all know, it's the 23rd annual Minority Health Conference, and it represents a very, very important professional development opportunity for our students, many of whom that I've had contact with, and for the others on the faculty, staff, researchers, practitioners, and all of those who are concerned with the broad topic of the health of minority populations. As I looked over the agenda for this year, I again was somewhat in awe, very impressed by the vast array of scholars, practitioners, and others who are scheduled to help us better understand the complexities of the impact of social and environmental factors on the health of minority populations. As we all are aware, the expected growth in the populations of people of color in the coming decades underscore the necessity to remain vigilant in our efforts to both improve the access to competent health care by minority groups and to improving the overall health of these same persons. So in a very important way, this annual conference illustrates the commitment that the School of Public Health and indeed our university has to our public service mission. This opportunity to share and exchange, to network and converse with a wide range of professionals in public health and human services ultimately will enhance our common goal of improving the health of minority communities in our nation. Again, I say welcome this time on my behalf, and we hope that all of you have a very productive and rewarding day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Irvin. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Melissa Green, Chair of this year's Planning Committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Green. As chair of this year's Minority Health Conference Planning Committee, I welcome you to the 23rd Annual Minority Health Conference. Thank you, all of you seated in the audience, for attending today, and thank you to our satellite and webcast audience. As has been remarked, the Minority Health Conference is student-planned and organized with the assistance of the School of Public Health, Office of Student Affairs, and Office of Continuing Education. Planning for this year's conference began almost a year ago. This year's theme, Race, Class, and Environment, the State of Minority Health, evolved from planning committee discussions and desires to address underlying factors that contribute to health disparities. As upcoming health professionals contemplating our roles in public health, we chose this theme to reflect the complexity of health disparities among racial and ethnic minorities. Acknowledging that health disparities go beyond race and ethnicity, this year's conference goal is to explore the impact of social and environmental factors on the health of minority populations by presenting the underlying conditions, examining innovative strategies, and identifying priority areas for future research and practice. In addressing this goal, we felt it important to emphasize the role of active community participation in ensuring that initiatives serve the public health interests of community members. It is our hope that the information shared in today's sessions will bring us closer to this goal. The day's events will conclude with our afternoon panel discussion, Public Health in the New Administration, Impact on the Future. We anticipate an exciting discussion. Panelists will discuss potential opportunities and challenges during President Bush's administration for health professionals committed to reducing racial and ethnic health disparities. The Minority Health Conference Planning Committee has devoted many hours over the past several months to organize and plan this conference while still carrying full academic loads. I would now like to take a moment to acknowledge these wonderful committee members for their exceptional resourcefulness and teamwork. Would subcommittee chairs please stand? Would committee members please stand? Thank you. I can tell you from my experience volunteering on the Minority Health Planning Committee that the opportunity to work with promising health professionals from various disciplines in public health has been a rewarding experience. If you are interested in assisting in planning the 24th Annual Minority Health Conference, please let us know on your evaluation forms. I just wanted to let you know that the legacy of the Minority Health Conference was initiated by the Minority Student Caucus in February of 1977, thanks to Mr. Bill Small, as a school-wide event attracting approximately 100 participants. Each year, the conference continues to grow. This year, 421 individuals were able to register for the conference, and an additional 105 were waitlisted. Also, we are proud to be able to provide access to the keynote address and afternoon panel sessions to off-site audiences by satellite and webcast. Thanks to contributions made by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and coordinating efforts of Dean Andra Shields, Dr. Fix Schoenbach, Lou Binkowski, and the School of Public Health, Office of Information Technology, 60 sites are joining us today by satellite. I would now like to introduce Dr. Vic Schoenbach, who has been actively involved in the planning committee efforts since 1991. Dr. Schoenbach will introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
In recognition of the diversity in our audience in the hall, in 34 states and in countries around the world, I would like to greet you in several languages. Jambo, bonjour, good morning, namaste, ni hao, konnichiwa, yate habin, osio. My name is Victor Schoenbach, and I am grateful to the Minority Health Conference Planning Committee for the honor of introducing the third William T. Small Jr. Keynote lecture. Joining me as co-presider on this session is Mr. Jacoby Wilson, co-president of the Minority Student Caucus and doctoral student in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences and Engineering. He's entitled to some applause, actually. Go ahead. Mr. Jacoby will moderate the question and comment period after the lecture. Until his retirement 2 years ago, Dean William Small was Associate Dean and Senior Advisor for Multicultural Affairs in the School of Public Health, where he assisted, encouraged, inspired, and advocated for thousands of students during a period of nearly 30 years. The trust he earned is illustrated by the fact that even years after graduation, former students seek his advice before making major decisions. During his time at the school, Dean Small received awards from the School of Public Health Minority Student Caucus and from the School of Public Health entire student body, from University of North Carolina Black alumni, from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the Black Caucus of Health Workers of the American Public Health Association. Dean Small also taught courses at historically Black North Carolina Central University, served on various boards and commissions, including one to which he was appointed by the governor, and along with a fellow UNC School of Public Health alumnus, established the first undergraduate program in industrial hygiene and safety at an historically Black institution of higher learning, St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina. Retired from UNC, Dean Small is now a faculty member at North Carolina Central University and also vice chairman of the Durham County Board of Health and a board member for an organization dedicated to serving homeless individuals and families in Durham County. Knowing that in 2 minutes I could not possibly do justice to Dean Small's accomplishments, I took the liberty of placing his biography on our Minority Health Project website, www.minority.unc.edu, where, if you like, you can read about this very impressive person of our time. Would you please join me in an expression of appreciation for Dean William Small? Would you please stand? I think he's still a little uneasy about my putting his biography on the web. I had to twist his arm a little bit to do it. And now we are very excited, all the more so because his trip from New Mexico took 15 hours instead of 5, and we were a little anxious there last night. We are very excited to have Mr. Richard Moore with us today and to be able to share his lecture with a satellite audience in 34 states and an internet audience in cyberspace. Mr. Richard Moore, whose biography can also be found on our website, is founder and director of the Bobby Garcia Memorial Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and a founding member of 2 organizations working to protect and promote the well-being of people in the American Southwest. Of Puerto Rican descent, Mr. Moore has worked for over 25 years as a community activist and organizer around such issues as welfare rights, police brutality, health care, child nutrition, racism, and the struggle for environmental and economic justice. Mr. Moore is presently coordinator of the Southwest Network of over 80 community-based grassroots organizations working in 6 southwestern states and Mexico. He served on the planning committee for the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991, and as chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee to the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Moore has received awards for his accomplishments in environmental justice, human rights, and the advancement of public policy. Now, would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Richard Moore?
You know, I was a little worried last night. It usually takes about 5 hours to fly from Albuquerque to Dallas. I mean, it takes about 1 hour and 15 minutes to fly from Albuquerque to Dallas, and it took me 5 hours. But you know, sometimes, I was telling some folk this morning that it took me as long to fly from Albuquerque to Raleigh-Durham as it took me to fly from Albuquerque to South Africa. And so that was quite a long haul and endeavoring trip to get here. Mother Nature is Mother Nature, and when she calls, then it could go either way at that particular point. And there was a rainstorm, a thunderstorm in Dallas, and so many of us that were flying through that direction were having somewhat difficulty. I wanted to take the opportunity and bring you greetings this morning, sisters and brothers, in behalf of the over 80 organizations of the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice. As some of you know, we're a network of grassroots, youth, student, and labor organizations working on environmental and economic justice issues, not only throughout the southwestern part of the United States, but the west and the northern borders of Mexico. Again, we are a people of color network. Our constituency is made up of African American, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, and Native American organizations. Also, we have sister organizations throughout the southeastern part of the United States and throughout the United States. For example, the Southern Organizing Committee, presently in the southeastern part, the African American Environmental and Economic Justice Network, the Asian Pacific Islander Environmental Justice Network, the Indigenous Environmental Justice Network, and the Farm Worker Environmental and Economic Justice Network. So I bring you greetings, sisters and brothers, this morning, and contributions and congratulations to this, as I understand, over 20th activity that has taken place here at the University of North Carolina. Now, I was also worried a little bit this morning once I got in, and I appreciate the brother picking me up this morning at the airport, whether my clothes were going to make it, okay? You know, and I started thinking for a minute. I said, you know, there was a contest that took place years and years ago because we were supposed to be meeting with then President Clinton, you know, and the Clinton administration several years ago. And many of our sisters and brothers and colleagues in the environmental justice movement began to do a contest through the computers and said, will Richard in fact wear blue jeans to meet the president, or will he wear the suit and tie that he actually hasn't worn for about the last 25 years? And so then I began to see this through the internet, this contest and the bidding, and will he wear the blue jeans and will he not wear the blue jeans? And I said to myself this morning, I got a small reflection to that. I said, if the blue jeans make it, or if the blue jeans don't make it, I can live without that. But I have to tell you, sisters and brothers, I wouldn't have been able to be here this morning if my boots would have not made it, okay? I want to take this opportunity again and congratulate the sisters and brothers on the planning committee that have helped to make this activity happen. Many of us that have been involved throughout these last many, many years in terms of having activities similar to this know the endeavors and the struggles and the challenges and some kind difficulties that it takes to organize an activity like this today. So again, sisters and brothers, I congratulate you all, the faculty, the staff here at the university, the students, the professors, our community sisters and brothers that have been in the long haul throughout the last many, many years for environmental and economic justice. And I would hope by the time that we finish today that you will agree that this over 20th activity today will be one of the best planned and organized activities that this university has had in environmental and economic justice throughout these last 20 years. So I'm going to try to share some information with you in this very brief period of time this morning. One, I wanted to just take a minute to give you a general idea of the community that I live in. Where do I come from? Huh? And so I want to say to you that I come from a community that's proud. We're historically proud. We have one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city of Albuquerque. We don't live actually in the city. We live in the county. Not very far from downtown Albuquerque, 5 or 10 minutes. For those of you that have been to New Mexico, then you'd know that we have a very large state, not necessarily in population, but in acres. So I come from a small, primarily Mexican community in the outskirts of Albuquerque. And surrounding our community, very interestingly, is several different characteristics or institutions or corporations. Huh? To the northern side of my neighborhood, we're surrounded by one of the largest hog farms in the county of Albuquerque. To the southern side of my neighborhood, we house and hold the only municipal sewage facility in the city of Albuquerque. To the eastern side of my neighborhood, we're surrounded by the petrochemical industry, whether it's Chevron or Texaco or many of those petrochemical companies that are involved in the kind of industry, gas and the petrochemical industry and so on in the city of Albuquerque and throughout this country. So what I'm saying to you on the other side of our community then is the landfill. It was the only municipal landfill in the city of Albuquerque. Now, some might say, in this primarily Mexican community, 99% Mexican and very proud to be Mexican, some might say, why do you want to live here? Why don't you just move? And what I say to you today is what we've said for many, many years. We're proud of our community. Many of those corporations and institutions were moved into our community after we were there, and some in some cases were there realistically when we moved in, and we understand that. But what I tell you is that there's no reason, whether it's in my community and the impacts, they changed the name. They didn't want to call it the sewage plant anymore, so they made a big word like this, and they started calling it something else. I don't even know how to pronounce the word, but what I can tell you is that all of what goes down anyone's bathroom is what's coming into our community, okay? Through that sewage plant. Now, our community has struggled for years upon years upon years because of the odors and the smells that's coming from this particular facility, no? And we've won many, many victories, and many, many victories are still to be won. The petrochemical industry, when there's a spill, our water's been contaminated. The landfill, the trash that falls off the back of the trucks as it goes through our neighborhoods. The kind of conditions, the mosquitoes, the health impacts, mosquitoes and rats and roaches and everything else that comes about when your neighborhood is located close to a municipal landfill. So whether it's all of those combinations of things or not, what I'm saying to you is whether it's my community in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or whether it's an African-American community, whether it's an indigenous community, or whoever's community it may be, I can guarantee to you, unfortunately, sisters and brothers, that what most people don't want in their neighborhoods and their communities is what is located in our communities. Now, I must also tell you that in this story, it could be here in North Carolina, it could be in South Carolina, it could be in Alabama, it could be in Mississippi, it could be wherever, it could be in New York City, it could be in New Jersey, it could be in San Antonio, Texas, it could be wherever it may be. There's not much difference in terms of what I'm expressing to you today, that in terms of the conditions in our community that exist in many of others of our sisters and brothers' communities. Now, what I'm saying to you also is that we can call whatever we want to call and not use the words that in many cases even government institutions and others have asked us not to use. They've asked us not to use, in some cases, the word genocide. And I tell you, sisters and brothers, that the conditions that many of our folk live under today are genocidal conditions, and you have to call it for whatever it is. I can also tell you that they've asked us in many cases, even in terms of environmental issues, and we're environmental justice activists, sisters and brothers. In terms of environmental issues, not to attach the word racism to the environmentalism. And I tell you that many of the conditions that we live and work under and many of our communities must be called for what it is, and it's environmental racism, sisters and brothers. That's exactly what it is, and it can be called nothing else other than that. So I came this morning to celebrate many, many, many of the victories over the last 8 years, over the last 15 years, over the last 20 years, over the last 30 years, whatever that can be, because we're winners, sisters and brothers, we're not losers. So I wanted to share some statistics with you, okay? And bear with me here for just a minute. Because many sometimes say that what we're saying is some mistruths. But what we committed ourselves to was to justice, and although there's many injustices that are taking place in many of our communities, we will not be part of those injustices, no? So I want to share some information with you today. Race, poverty, and the environment, as you all know, are in increasingly recognized as interlocking issues. No? Now, United Church of Christ, particularly the Commission for Racial Justice, had documented that low-income communities, and especially people of color, are impacted by toxic pollution. Children, the elderly, and women, especially women of color, are paying the highest price from pollution as a result of increased work and health problems, and in many cases, economic devastation. The military, industry, agribusiness, and the government, all levels, are the major polluters in poor communities. We must understand that, sisters and brothers. The harmful social, economic, and cultural effects include the loss of resources such as clean air, land, and air, and water. For indigenous peoples, contamination of traditional holy sites leads to the loss of cultural and religious expression and freedom. Workplace hazards and environmental degradation impact severely on human health, on the job, and in our communities. Now, let me give you some statistics that came from many of the institutions that many of you are representing from here today. Children living near military installations have unusual high rates of cancer and other illnesses. In my community, a neighborhood in Albuquerque, South Valley, an infant almost died from drinking formula mixed with contaminated water from the family's well. My community is downstream from Kirtland Air Force Base, a suspected source of groundwater contamination in the area. Navajo teenagers, sisters and brothers, and let's not allow ourselves sometimes to be separated, culturally, ethnically, or otherwise. Navajo teenagers have organ cancer. Listen to me, sisters and brothers, okay? Navajo teenagers have organ cancer 17 times the national average. Uranium spills from mining activities on Navajo land have contaminated their air, water, and soil. And other indigenous people that have a supai of the Grand Canyon, the sisters and brothers, the over 500 of them that live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, fear that the same kind of contamination in their area have been being brought about by the permitting of United Nuclear Corporation by the U.S. Forest General to mine uranium on the rim of the Grand Canyon. Now let's keep going. African American communities in Richmond, California are surrounded by dozens of industrial facilities that handle toxic chemicals, including Chevron petrochemical plants. These facilities discharge over 210 different toxics into the air and water and as solid waste at unsafe storage sites. Farm worker communities in Earlemont, California. Some say that we're exaggerating many times. McFarland, California, sisters and brothers, where our children are being born without fingers, without hands, and without legs. McFarland, California, where that primarily African-American community was built, or Mexican-American community was built on top of a pesticide dump. Now that community also is surrounded by fields. And you know that our farm worker sisters and brothers that brought the food about, that the fruit this morning that we were sharing here, live in that community, and then the pesticide spraying that takes place, the 5-mile radius. Texarkana, Texas, sisters and brothers. Sister Patsy Oliver, who passed away several years ago, African-American community, built on top of a creosote dump. When the dogs started being born, the animals started being born with 3 legs, and the trees started dying in Texarkana, Texas, and our sister Patsy Oliver and many of the residents of that African-American community that was standing up and standing up and standing up, all different kinds of cancers, any kind of cancer that you can imagine. The state of Texas wouldn't listen. This is where our Mr. Bush comes from, no? The state of Texas wouldn't listen. And until people started dying, young people and old, in Texarkana, Texas, and because of the persistence of that grassroots organization in Texarkana, Texas, then those issues started coming to national limelight. As I said to you, Southern California, the chili pickers, Houston, Texas, pharmaceutical companies, where our young sisters and brothers are being born without brains. And in many cases, like in Texarkana, Texas, they said it's because of the food that you're eating. In our communities, it's because you're eating too many tortillas, or you're eating too much green chili or red chili or beans or whatever it may be. In Mexican communities, it's not the pharmaceutical company. In my neighborhood, when the children began to start getting very, very sick, and then we became aware that the water that we were drinking in our neighborhood had been contaminated for over 25 years. Over 25 years, we were drinking contaminated water. And the way we found it out came from two different directions. One, because the workers in that military installation began to talk publicly about what was happening there. And the other is because we filed under the Freedom of Information. And in those documents, reading the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages, then we became aware was the crossed off information and the crossed off information and the crossed off information, that for over 25 years, we were drinking contaminated water. Now, you know, our water was contaminated with nitroglycerin. Now, who in their right mind, but somebody in their mind, it might not have been in their right mind, would try to convince us that we were responsible for the nitroglycerin contamination in our water? But yet they attempted to try to do that. Until the children in the elementary school began to get sick, and we had what's called the blue baby syndrome. And that's where, in actuality, our young sisters and brothers, particularly the babies, then the formula, with the example that I gave you, the mothers would heat up the water, would give the child the formula, and then about 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes later or whatever, the child would begin to turn blue. And the oxygen would be sucked out of the child, and the blue and the baby began to be much more blue and much more blue because the oxygen was being sucked out of the child. And until we said we're not going to put up with it no more, and the National Guard had to come into my neighborhood in Albuquerque and bring water trucks in, we had to close the elementary school down, not take the children out of school, but put them back in the hands of their elders and bring them out of those educational institutions. Until that happened, the state of New Mexico or the city of Albuquerque would not declare responsibility for what was taking place in our neighborhoods. Now, I tell you, whether it's the southeastern part of the United States, the northeastern part of the United States, the southwestern part of the United States, the northwestern part of the United States, whatever part of this country is in the borders, and please, sisters and brothers, not forget our sisters and brothers throughout this world, because many of you know that although we're primarily interested in clearing up the results of years upon years upon years of contamination, we are not interested in moving or dislocating that contaminated soil or otherwise into someone else's community, whatever color that community may be. And we're not interested, sisters and brothers, in moving that material to anyone else's country throughout this world. I tell you that our border states of Canada and Mexico, that if our young sisters and brothers up and down the Mexico-U.S. border are being born without brains, then it's not only our sisters and brothers in Mexico that bear that responsibility of injustice to do something about those conditions. It's us that's in this room today. It's institutions like this institution that's sponsoring this activity today. Now, I didn't come here this morning to preach or to teach, because many of you have the same kind of examples. I know with the booth set up, and many of the community groups that are here represented today could tell story after story after story. And I know that many of the students here in this department are working with community organizations in Raleigh and Durham and other communities that surround this institution. And I congratulate you all for that. But I also must tell you and bring some real truth to the situation to you. You know, throughout this history, that when the Environmental Protection Agency, and I congratulate our sisters and brothers that work in the Environmental Protection Agency and the National Institute of Health Sciences and many of the other health-related institutions, because many of our folk joined those institutions and believe firmly in the mission that those institutions said that they want to carry forward? But do you know that previous to the last 10 years of this history that the Environmental Protection Agency was very knowledgeable by a report that was completed and shelved and never released that showed the high levels of contamination in African American and Latino communities, and they chose 10 or 15 years ago not to release that document? And because of the sincerity of many of the staff people inside those institutions, we picked that document up about 10 years ago. You know, we told 10 years ago the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, if you are going to do an internal confidential memo, send it to us, because we're going to get it anyway. Okay? So about every confidential memo that the EPA had put together, one morning we would wake up and it would be on the fax machine. And so we got a copy of that document. We also got a copy of a document from the U.S. EPA 10 years ago that said that the environmental justice movement was one of the most dangerous developing movements in this country because it was a merge between human rights and civil rights, social justice and economic justice. It brought all of those elements together. And in that confidential memo, it said, we must do everything in our possibility to destroy the environmental justice movement. And we received that document in October, and we monitored it through November and December and January and February, several years ago. And it said in there, it said, in order to co-opt this movement, we have to do several things. Well, one, we would have to move to co-opt its leadership. And then it said that we would have to move to have a counter strategy in terms of the reports that are being released. Race, Poverty, and Class by the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. It's not a legitimate research document. These are the kind of things that they began to say. And in the New York Times and the Washington Post, then you would see, monitoring this document, articles come out denouncing the commission report. That it isn't a race issue, it's a class issue. Now, it's very, very interesting to us, sisters and brothers, because many of us may have not graduated from high school. But as my son says, when you drive by the sewage plant, Papi, and I smell the odor from the sewage plant, and I go to the meeting that evening, and then the officials are there and saying that that smell's not coming from the sewage plant. It's coming from the hog farm. And my son would say, Papi, do you believe that they think that we're stupid enough not to understand the difference of the smell from the sewage plant to the hog farm? So we're talking about nose psychology. No? And that's what it was in this document. It was very, very interesting because what they said is that in this case, Mr. Rowley, under the previous time to the Bush administration, that in order to co-opt our movement, that Mr. Rowley was going to speak Spanish on different Latino holidays. And he was going to give announcements in Spanish and speeches in Spanish. And on the side of that document it said, but he don't speak Spanish. Because this was a document in progress, working document, working its way up. And it said in Martin Luther King's birthday that then we will have pronouncements of all the work that Dr. Martin Luther King had done for all these years, and what are the linkages between the protection of the environment, the protection of the environment. And we don't separate health from environmental justice. Health is environmental justice. Let's be very clear about that. And then it said, let's give university institutions grants, research grants, to denounce the UCC report. And we've seen them pop out of different universities. I won't name those universities today. University of Pittsburgh. And then the other thing it said that, as I said, we'll put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the EPA in terms of denouncing the race question over the class question. I mean, does anyone, as I say, sisters and brothers, are we naive enough to think or to not think that very obviously it's a class issue? That poor people are being dumped on whether they're African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, whether they're poor white communities in Appalachia, wherever they may be, poor white communities in the Southeast, wherever they may be. But I must tell you, sisters and brothers, we're aware that it's a class issue. But unfortunately, it's a race issue. And if you read the documents, the consultative documents by industries and others, where they say where to site many of these facilities, it says cite them in primarily Catholic communities. Who lives in primarily Catholic communities in New Mexico? It said to cite them in low-income communities. I don't know. It said to cite them in undereducated communities. I don't know. I'm just ignorant. It said to cite the facilities in communities that lack political power. Now, we're making up things? These are reports, these are documents that we have in our files, and many of you have access to and have read in many cases. Clark Atlanta University, the Environmental Justice Research Center, Xavier University, a Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. Many of our academic research institutions in the environmental justice movement have copies of those documents. It's not about us making them up. Unfortunately, we don't have to make anything up, sisters and brothers. We don't have to make anything up. So what I wanted to share with you today is some honesty. You know, I'm about making friends, but, you know, if I don't make any friends here at the University of North Carolina, I'm going to catch a plane in about 3 or 4 hours. And I can guarantee you I got a lot of friends at home. Some of them don't want me in New Mexico, but I have no intentions of leaving, okay? I'm staying there. Haven't left yet and ain't going nowhere yet. So what I wanted to do is to share some of these things with you, sisters and brothers, and talk about the kind of importance of the work that all of you are a part of in the health fields. Huh? Because what I must tell you is that although some of you will be going into the public health arena and you'll go to work for the CDCs and the NIHESs and the DPPs and the HOMP and all that kind of stuff, that's very, very important work because you have to take your commitment and all those things with you. And never forget the community that you came from. Never forget, sisters and brothers, how we got where we were today, because you know as well as I know, if it wasn't for those sisters and brothers that marched, occupied, demonstrated, took over, did whatever it is, we would not be sitting here today in the numbers we are at any university institution in this country. And let's not forget that, okay? Let's not forget that, whether it's Rosa Parks or whether it's our sister Rosa Parks, or whether it's Malcolm X, or whether it's Dr. Martin Luther King, or many of the sisters and brothers, Cesar Chavez, whoever it may be in this country, that without their leadership and direction and their commitment and gave their lives, we would not be here talking about what we're talking about today. We would be talking about it, don't get me wrong, because we're going to talk about it anyway. The question ain't just about talking about it, it's what we're going to do about it. So what I want to share with you is a couple of other things. Now, in our communities, when it comes to some health institutions, and now I got all the respect, and our folk know it, our sister back there from the EPA, the other folk, no. Richard didn't come here to denounce no government institution or whatever. But I got to tell you the truth, okay? Public health institutions have been used against grassroots organizations. Against grassroots organizations. Tucson, Arizona, 40 to 60,000 people, African American and Latino, drinking contaminated water with TCE for years upon years upon years. Any kind of cancer you can think about is in that community in Tucson, Arizona. Hughes Air Force Base was the primary responsible culprit for that contamination, who they worked for, the U.S. government. TCE contaminated water. We took representatives from the Environmental Protection Agency to visit the community in Tucson, and we showed 3 generations of cancers. We brought a mother and an elderly sister, mother, to the table. She had cancer. She brought her daughter to the meeting, and she had cancer. And that sister brought her daughter to the meeting, and she had cancer. And it's not about tortillas or green chili or red chili. It's about the TCE contaminated water that they've been drinking for 15, 20, and 30 years. That's what it's all about. And then we have CDCs, health institutions, in some cases, county, city, state and federal. And I'm not talking about everybody. Bear with me here now. We know that. But then we have institutions that come and justify the kind of injustice, injustice that's been imposed in our community. And say then, does your family have a history of alcoholism? Yeah, I had a few beers and a few shots of tequila, sir. Does your family have a history of drug abuse? Yeah, we got some. What about you? What about you? Do you have any psychological problems? You're damn right I do. And if we don't do something about this problem, I'm going to have more of a psychological problem, okay? Because I'll be right on the verge of getting plenty pissed off, and you call that whatever you want to call it. Because we ain't putting up with it no more, okay? So what I say to you is that, yes, when you go sometimes into our neighborhood and our sisters and brothers say, we don't believe it. I just came back from Torreon, Mexico in December. Over 1,000 children were poisoned by that lead smelter in Torreon, Mexico. And they turned the research over to a U.S. government institution. Now, that institution has been used in the past to come and justify everything that industry and government has done to us. And we're expected to believe that the health study that institution is going to do is going to come out and say, it's this lead smelter that created the problem? I don't think so, sisters and brothers, okay? I would like to think so, because it's the truth, okay? But I don't think so. Dallas, Texas. Let's be serious here, okay? African-American lead smelter, no? Stack as big as this school, no? African-American. You go into the community, and when I went with Reverend Conley and many of the congregational members of his church, they said, Richard, when you come into our neighborhood, please just say, do you see anything different than you've seen in many other communities that you've been in? And we were driving in the neighborhood, and we're talking about proud people, no? And we were driving through the neighborhood, and then you look and you say, Rev, I see a lot of ramps going to the doors, you know what I mean? Say, yeah, keep looking. And in every neighborhood, street that you drove up and down, you've seen a ramp here, and a ramp here for the wheelchairs, and a ramp here for the wheelchairs, and whatever. Now that lead smelter, because many a times we're told, hey, lead poisoning, okay? But we're told, we didn't know nothing about that, sir. That was something that happened 25 years ago. We understand that, okay? But when that lead smelter poisoned that African-American community and then packed up its belongings because the community organized against it and moved to Mexico and did the exact same thing in Tijuana, Mexico, then it's not about not knowing anything about it anymore, sisters and brothers. We're talking about genocide is what we're talking about, and let's be very clear about it. Let's be very clear about it, okay? We understand that there's chemicals that have been used 10, 15, 20 years ago that we didn't understand the health impact about. And some of the results of that we're seeing years and years later. But what I tell you, though, G.T. Lankert in Albuquerque, New Mexico, poisoned over 400 women, primarily women of color, single women head of the household. Poisoned. Was it by accident? Cancers. Was it by accident? Then you answer the question for me, because many of those workers would tell you inside that facility that when they began to look at the systems, the ventilation systems, that because the company did not want to put that much resources into doing proper ventilation and everything else, that the venting systems were directed in the areas where large number of women of color were working at. They weren't in any of the offices, I can guarantee you, okay? So again, if we don't know then, why when that company was busted because it's not operating in New Mexico anymore, why then did it move to what is Mexico? I don't know. Changed its name and did the exact same thing in what is Mexico that it did in Albuquerque. Everything is not by accident, okay? Let's be clear about that. So we can talk about African Americans, we can talk about Asian Pacific Islanders. You know, you go into Chinatown in San Francisco, and sometimes if you've been there, then you walk through the alleys, the very beautiful alleys, you know, and you look and you see a lot of boarded up windows, you know? And you say to yourself, well, how come everything is so boarded up? You know? And then if you peek through one of those little boards and don't get smacked while you're peeking or whatever, And then you look inside the window and you see 50 workers or 100 workers in there. They're sweatshops. Sweatshops. It's not by accident, sisters and brothers. The kind of chemical exposure, workplaces. We cannot separate from environmental justice, labor, or economic justice. We've said that for years and years and years. We will not allow it to happen. We do not buy into the concept of jobs versus the environment. We know, as we knew in Las Vegas, New Mexico, when those sisters and brothers voted to go on strike at that particle board company in Las Vegas, New Mexico, that there was a possibility they were going to lose their job. But I tell you something, when they raised their hands and their mothers and their wives and their children came to that meeting that day and said, brothers, we know that you're putting the food on the table by going into that plant every day. But we're here to tell you we ain't putting up with it no more. We will march on those picket lines with you. If we got to close this facility down because it won't clean itself up, because those sisters and brothers were being poisoned inside the facility and also drinking contaminated water in their communities from the same facility. It was a double dosage of death, sisters and brothers, okay? But when they raised their hands and said, it's on us. I was in Las Vegas, New Mexico. We'll be back there for the 4th of July fiestas. And they're proud people, no? They're proud. Now, that facility is not open, I can guarantee you. And even some of our sisters and brothers from labor that came back later on, and we're labor supporters, believe me, we're firmly that, and said, you were responsible for closing the facility down. We had to tell them the truth. You were responsible for closing the facility down. Those workers came to you and asked you to stand up for their rights, and you didn't do it, okay? So they stood up for their own rights. We're labor supporters. Don't confuse what I'm saying, okay? I wanted to close with some things, and I do really get excited and have a lot of reason to get excited, you know. But just to provide you some information you may or may not be knowledgeable of. And we wanted to congratulate the Clinton administration for the presidential executive order on environmental justice. I have to tell you that. But if wouldn't it be for our grassroots sisters and brothers, our religious sisters and brothers, our academic institutions, sisters and brothers, all of those institutions, the Clinton administration would have never signed an executive order on environmental justice. It came from a movement, okay? The Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice, an institution that was helped to be created by the environmental justice movement. We've got all the respect for in the world. I want you, if you're not knowledgeable of some of these institutions, to become knowledgeable of them and to be supporters and be participants in them. The Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice is the institution that brings together, whether it's HUD or DOJ or DOD or DOE or the Bureau of Land Management or whoever it may be. It brings our folk together from the government institutions with grassroots organizations and industry. We're about building partnerships. We want jobs. It's not that we don't want jobs. But we don't need to be put all the time in no life and death situation, okay? Not all the time we don't need to do that. So we want to work with companies and industries that are really about providing a good workplace for those sisters and brothers inside there, whether it's wages or worker health and safety, and the surrounding communities where many of those corporations are located at. Now, I could go on and on and share. You know about the People of Color Summit, you know what I mean? You may know that many said for years and years and years, we really want to bring those people of color on board, but they're only worried about child care and health. They're not worried about the environment. And we told some of our sisters and brothers, you tell us if you saw a whale float down the Rio Grande, then you must have been on drugs, okay? So we're worried about the minnow and we're worried about the whale. We're worried about the butterflies and we're worried about the lizards. We're also worried about every sister and brother that sits in this room and every sister and brother in this country. And those are interconnected, interlinked. We need to be working just as hard on the human impact on the environment as we do on the animal and all the other impacts on the environment. That's what we said for years and years. We truly believe that. We truly believe that. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. We just had an election. But all I can tell you is that we didn't just sit back on any other election or any other administration or whatever it may be. We put just as much pressure on the Clinton administration as we have intentions of doing on this administration. I don't want to come all the way here to North Carolina and smash Mr. Bush. I don't call him president yet because I remember Florida, okay? I ain't forgot Florida. Said, damn, you know, you took all these years to try to get your voting rights. You know, we marched and protested and whatever. And then all of a sudden, you got a little bit of it, and then even that's taken from you. Your vote don't even count. Everybody's telling me about the Constitution of the United States. I said, well, hey, you know, it's like, I know when it was put together, it wasn't put together for us. But at least it's on paper. Shit. I mean, you got to live up to it every once in a while. Now, let's talk about Texas for 2 minutes before they put the sign up on me, okay? Where our esteemed Mr. Bush comes from, okay? Houston, Texas. Pharmaceuticals, remember what I told you now? Children born without brains. Was he not knowledgeable of all these environmental injustices that have been taking place in Houston, Texas? Austin, Texas. A tank farm. 5 or 6 different companies, petrochemical companies, located in a primary Mexican African-American community. Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas. People were having heavy breathing problems, skin rashes, everything you can imagine. Was he not knowledgeable of all those issues? Now he's going to become our environmental president? Okay? San Antonio, Texas, Kelly Air Force Base, the Alamo Dome. The Alamo Dome, for those of you that don't know it, was built on top of a contaminated site, okay? The city of San Antonio knows it, and so does the state of Texas. Whose community surrounds the Alamo Dome? Mexican and African American. He didn't know anything about it? You can go up and down Port Arthur or wherever it is in the state of Texas. He didn't know nothing about it? TNRCC, the state agency. The EPA knows very clearly. The Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The state of Texas had the largest amount of civil rights violations on environmental injustice, on environmental racism in the country came from the state of Texas. Mr. Bush didn't know anything about it? Now I'm telling you that we knew that it wasn't going to be easy anyway, whoever's administration it was. But I'm telling you, if we only sit back and complain and let those, you know, the only sometimes the difference, I know I'm going to catch you off for this one, okay? So nobody wants to talk to me afterwards, that's fine with me. I'll sit over there by myself in the back, okay? You know, one of the things that one of the things with the Republicans has always been like, no, we ain't going to do it. And then one of the things with the Democrats has been, we understand your problem. We understand your problem. You know we understand your problem, Richard. We've been working on that for years, and we're going to work with you on that. Now, I ain't a fool. I ain't going to tell you how I voted, but I ain't a fool. Let me just put it that way, okay? I didn't want to see the executive order thrown out or anything. You know, I don't want to, interagency working group, I don't want to see any of that thrown out. So I wanted to close, you know, just by these words. And, you know, I just came back from Seattle, Washington last week, the home of the WTO. Spoke to 600 and almost 700 Latino, I thought college students, but they were high school students. I said, I'm going to have to come up with some good ones before this morning's over. Because I got 600 little brown, crispy critters out there looking at me, saying, boy, if you don't liven something up here this morning, we're going to give you a little whipping, okay? And we did a little test, you know. So what does the WTO stand for, and how does it relate to anything that you're doing? What about the United Nations Conference on Racism coming up in South Africa? How does it relate to what you're working on? What about the climate change conference that just took place in The Hague? How does it relate to what you're working on? How does the WTO and what took place in Seattle, Washington relate to what you're doing today and what you were doing during that time period? I tell you, those sisters and brothers were pretty highly educated, no? But they're building an organization. They ain't just sitting back talking about it, okay? They're building a powerful student organization that will be part of a powerful student movement that will be part of the powerful environmental and economic justice movement in this country today. So I leave you as students saying there's as much you can do, and faculty, you know you're doing some of it. But I also have to tell you that it's time that, again, that we call on this government of the United States to practice its mission statement. We're not those sidebars or, you know, with the NAFTA, we used to call it the shafta, huh? You know, my son told me one time, I hate to keep bringing up my son, but, you know, he told me one time, he said, Pops, the North American Free Trade Agreement. I said, son, you know, that anybody knows anything about treaties is Native Americans. No? Violation, 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 violation. No? So he said, NAFTA, but you call it Shafta. No? He said, is NAFTA like a popsicle? I said, yeah, it sounds kind of like a popsicle. You know? Because under the Clinton administration, everything was a sidebar, no? So sidebar on NAFTA, and a sidebar on welfare reform, and a sidebar on this, and a sidebar on that. So he said, is that sidebar a popsicle? I said, you're right, son, because it'll melt in your very hand if you put it out the window, okay? So sisters and brothers, keep up the good work. You got good faculty here that are committed in many of these institutions to make this world, this community, this state, this region, this country a better place for all of us to live and work. So I congratulate you on the work you've done, encourage you to continue the endeavors that you're working on. And again, sisters and brothers, in closing, bring greetings from our leadership, whether the youth or elder, whether they're African American, Latino, Native American, or Asian Pacific Islander. I bring you true greetings from the southwestern, west, northern border of Mexico to this conference today and to your work from here on after. So thank you, sisters and brothers, for this.
It's time for the question and answer period. Just give me a couple moments to get this on. We have two microphones to the left and right. If you could, please keep your questions brief. We have about 18 minutes, and we have at 10:30 we'll have our poster session. So if you could, please come up. If you have any questions or comments for Mr. Richard Moore, right now I'll stand to the right so y'all can focus on him.
You know, while we're doing that, and the folk, I think that's the microphone brother that, it's a brother that picked me up at the airport early this morning there. Thank you, brother. He was looking for a different Richard Moore. Said, have you seen a mellow Richard Moore? I said, I haven't met a mellow Richard Moore since he got over his shyness.
And he was wearing his boots, by the way.
Right.
Mr. Moore, I just want to ask you, you all have a multi-ethnic group working on the same mission. Here in the Southeast, how would you suggest that we could build that same kind of collaboration?
Well, that's a real important question, you know, and you know better than me in terms of the population in North Carolina is very rapidly changing. There's a lot of our sisters and brothers that are coming in, undocumented and documented sisters and brothers that are coming into this part of the state, to the state of North Carolina. And I understand that we've been asked, to help to participate in creating dialogue. I think one of those, is to support the boycott that the Farm Labor Organizing Project have called on pickles. Our sisters and brothers wouldn't be down here. You got to support the boycott, okay? I haven't ate a pickle since. I don't care whose pickle it is, okay? So, I mean, I think, one, we have to support each other's issues. And don't let us be divided, okay? Because, they try it in New Mexico, too. I say it's those undocumented folk that keep taking the jobs away from us. Let's be serious about it. Unfortunately, those sisters and brothers, our sisters and brothers are working on are jobs that other people are not doing. And they're being treated unjustly, being paid unjustly, health conditions. Let's educate ourselves, one, to the issue. Let's open up the dialogue. And let's not allow ourselves to be pitted against each other. Okay? They tried it in California with Proposition 187 and some of the other things that they've tried in the past, and they're going to continue to do that. Trying to give short versions. I got a longer thing than that, but I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to.
Next question.
Yeah, hi, I work on community-based environmental justice projects here in the School of Public Health, and was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, especially since you're here in this university setting, about the importance of the community setting the agenda for research and projects versus the academic institutions and government agencies, and how that's especially now of supreme importance to have it be community-driven.
Right, I try to keep it real, go ahead and very, very brief, because we're gonna be here together, and there's workshops and different activities, and some of this will come back up. What I say to institutions, whether university institutions or others, is that don't do anything for us, okay? Thank you very much. If you really want to do something, do it with us, okay? Don't do it for us, because the for us ain't really got us too far. You know what I'm saying? The other thing is, don't be using our name on no proposal. When you made the telephone call the other day, you made the telephone call the other day and said, are you interested in environmental justice? You're damn right, because this organization's been together for 10 years. And then it gets documented or whatever, and then you come here because it was some government grant or some state grant or whatever, that we're working in partnership with the institution. What's partnership? Partnership's about hiring, partnerships about the resources, partnerships about all the decision making, partnerships is about the work plan, partnerships about the whole thing. Huh? It's not just we'll bring you in for some advice. You're kind of ignorant, but we're going to bring you to ask you some. I'm being honest. I'm being a little nasty, you know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, I'm being truthful. So it's about that. Let's do things together. And some of the best partnerships we've seen, whether it's labor occupational health program, has been when communities, workers, and institutions have come together. No? So don't do anything for us, do something with us. No? Now, communities, I must tell you, if you allow yourself to be used, you're a damn fool, okay? So I said I wasn't going to try to make any friends. But we can't blame things on other people all the time. It's like I was in a meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I said, you know, sometimes we say it's the government's fault. Then sometimes it's the state's fault, and sometimes it's the county's fault, and the municipality's fault, and then it's the tribal council's fault. And sometimes it's your damn fault, and you accept the responsibility, okay? So let's do it together. That's what I'm saying. Hope that was helpful. I hope that line back there, all those folk are not in line, because we could be here for days.
Hi. My question has to do with how we develop partnerships with governmental agencies. They set the agenda for the type of research we do, and eventually that money impacts the type of work we do with communities and organizations. Right. Can you give suggestions on how we develop partnerships with governmental agencies?
Which agencies? I'm sorry.
Governmental agencies that provide research funding.
Okay. Well, let me just say this in the beginning, because, you know, I need to make this point. You know, over the last 8 years, you know, at least within the Environmental Protection Agency, there's been the Office of Environmental Justice, and in some of the regions. And in this region out here, you got some very dedicated sisters and brothers inside that institution. The environmental justice coordinators, and so I hope all this is not dismantled under this administration, but I'm just flagging that to you. Part of that partnership goes with that. And many of those folk are really in touch with grassroots folk. I'm not saying all the time now. Don't jump on me, community folk. Don't jump on me. You know, I'm not saying all the time. But we got some committed government employees. So committed, some of them had a press conference, if you remember last year, and charged the EPA with racism, okay? Employment discrimination, okay? So what I'm saying is, let's try to pull that together. Let's not be kind of wavered here to the side or whatever, no? In terms of those partnerships. I know I'm giving short versions. That's the only thing I can do right now. There's a Sister Pam Tali at the University of California Labor Occupational Health Program. We'll be together in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks in a presentation in San Francisco. And we've developed a set of principles. And I say we, I'm talking about grassroots folk. A set of principles that institutions should look at when they're developing partnerships. And these principles were developed by grassroots organizations, community folk, in conjunction with our other sisters and brothers.
Are there any more questions? Okay, Dr. Schoenbach.
Thank you very much for your remarks, by the way, and with my apologies to the audience, buenos dias, which unfortunately I left off my list of greetings. With the lawsuits against the tobacco industry, one of the things that was done after a lot of documents were obtained was to put them all on the internet. And I wondered if it would be possible to take some of those confidential memos that you're talking about and put them on the internet so people could read these things more widely.
That's a very good suggestion, Dean. You know, the 6 networks at least, the ones that I mentioned, are in the process of doing an assessment of our own organizations as an institution. A lot of those historical documents are being compiled now. Some of those historical documents are at Clark Atlanta, at the University, the Environmental Justice Research Center at Clark Atlanta. You know, because they're being archived. But very clearly, that's a good suggestion, and we'll take that back, and I can guarantee you'll see those documents pop up. Okay, now I think we're getting down to the end there, brother. I got to say a few words when we get there.
Okay. I know we have some more questions. Please, audience members, you've heard a very interesting, provocative keynote address If you have a question, you still have time to come up and address the question, Mr. Richard Moore. Don't be shy.
What do you think of the Bush's gestures towards Vicente Fox? What do you think it's all about Mexico?
Could you repeat that? I'll repeat it. Could you say that again?
What do you think about Bush's gestures towards Vicente Fox in Mexico, and is it all about Mexican oil?
The question was, what do you think about Bush's gesture to Vicente Fox in Mexico, and is it all about Mexican oil?
You know that there's a pilgrimage that's taking place in Mexico from the mountains of Chiapas, and the Zapatistas have been on the road heading to Mexico City. It's the sisters and brothers that have been in the mountains, indigenous sisters and brothers that have been in the mountains in that region, that were the first to step forward on the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And that march is taking place right now. They're supposed to arrive in Mexico City, I understand, on the 6th of March, and where hundreds of thousands of people will greet our sisters and brothers coming down from the mountains. Now, I'm saying that in this reflection because I think this visit is connected to that also. Now, you've been reading the articles. If you've been seeing the articles, Vicente Fox, just like Mr. Bush at the present time, is kind of it's a new piece, not anything new. In Mexico, it's much more new than it would be here with the every 4-year election and what's taking place historically. Very clearly, it has something to do with oil. And if you've been reading the articles, the young men in that village that he's going, it said very clearly that in the village that he's going to where President Fox, his family lives and all that, that most of the young men are not in that community. He said one of the surprising things when he goes in, if he's observant, well, he won't see that many young men. Because a lot of those young men have either moved into urban locations to work in the maquilas or the twin plants, or have come to the United States seeking employment and resources then to go back home. No? So very clearly it has to do with oil. It has to do with an economic agenda. And as we're looking at that then, we're talking about opening up the border. We're not talking about closing the border. Okay? We're talking about opening up the border. So when we're talking about the transportation of goods across the U.S.-Mexico border, we're also talking about the flow of people across the U.S.-Mexico border. Okay? In a just way. So very clearly, it's for economic purposes.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for a very interesting, informative, and very thought-provoking talk. And I have a couple of short questions. The first, you mentioned that in military installation, in places where you have military installations, there's a high incidence of cancer. I was wondering if that would include the military personnel and their families, and if so, are they doing something about it?
Very, very definitely. Whether it's the Philippines, I mean, come on, I mean, the stuff speaks for itself. Whether it's military bases in the Philippines or wherever it may be, no? You're going to find high cases of cancers, of health-related problems, because of the kind of things they're doing inside those institutions. Puerto Rico, look at Vecchis, for example, in Puerto Rico, no? I mean, the military, U.S. Navy, I mean, bombing people, okay? So yes, and yes, it is impacted on those, not only the families of, but the men and women that are in that military. Yes, I think there is some things being done about it, and I tell you, there's always a little bit of light in some tunnel. The tunnel gets a little darker some days, and other days it gets a little bit lighter. But I think there was some progress, job not completed, job not done, some progress in terms of looking at those issues, and that we need to be able to continue to work on that. Very clearly, I would agree with you on those points.
And my other question is, you talked about uranium spills, and I may have missed if you have mentioned where the spills were coming from in Navajo.
Well, you know, in the Acoma Laguna, particularly, I think there's a sister here from New Mexico, and there might be others here that have been in New Mexico or whatever. No? The uranium mining that took place on the Acoma Laguna reservation, or pueblo as we call them in New Mexico. No? The mining issues that have taken place there, and Sister Dorothy Purley, who just passed away last year while we were at the WTO in Seattle, one of the leaders of our organization, Indigenous Women Leaders. Those workers were poisoned inside the mines. Now, think back in the old days, okay? The old days. Now, I don't want to say the old days because many of you then might come back and say, you said the old day, and then it'll come back on me one day. They used to use canaries, no? I mean, you studied history and all that. They used to send canaries down into the mines, no? And so if gases were released or whatever, then the canary would stop chirping, obviously. No? Then they stopped sending canaries and they started sending us. No? And then it kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going. So some of it's in Arizona, some of it's in New Mexico, in terms of uranium mining, some of it's in Utah, some of it's in some of the other states. But let's not negate the fact of this southeastern part of the United States and that the impact that mining has across the board.
Because I may be naive, but I thought when it comes to radioactive materials, there's very stringent policies as to containing it. So there's...
Let me just tell you this, sister. There's been some damn good policies, okay? But they ain't been enforced in our neighborhood or in our workplaces. So you know that. I understand the point you're making.
Thank you.
Some of the best policies, we're about policy, we're about all these kind of things, but you know some of the best policy, whether it's been enforcement, whatever it's been, has not been done in our community. That's just the unfortunate fact of reality. You know?
If the environmental social justice movement had complete success, what would the world look like?
Now you're asking a serious question. And that's a pretty good question you're asking. And if you expect me to answer that in 30 seconds, I'm not going to do it. But one of the factors of that would be that there has got to be a system, whatever that is, that allows for the protection of workers and the protection of the community. That's one aspect of it. From an economic standpoint, I think many times that companies could make more money by doing things right than by doing things wrong. But if the agency only fines them $120 instead of the $10 million or whatever it needs to be fining them, then they're going to continue to do it wrong because it's only $150 instead of sinking the 5, 10, or 15 million in to doing it right, so that the impact in that will be positive both for the worker and for the community, and that company will make money. I'm assured of that. I'm broke, don't get me wrong, but I think the company will make money. Now, there's all those kind of economic, social, and all those kind of factors, and you know that there's situations now presently in the world, South Africa and many of the other countries, that are really trying to kind of engage in similar kind of questions that we're engaging in here. I know I'm giving you a short version. I can go into it deep if you want, because I did get my GED. Okay? Dropped out in the 10th, but got my GED. And so I apologize if I'm giving too, I'm not messing with you, but I'm trying to apologize if I'm giving too short of a version. It's a very serious question, and there's a lot to be added to that, both economically, politically, socially, and all those other aspects that go along with it.
Before we go to the next and last question, I'd like to thank the satellite audience for participating in this conference and remind them that the broadcast will begin again at 3:15. We'll have the panel discussion, implications of the Bush administration on public health, looking at the impact on the future of minority health. So, bye, satellite audience. And we have our last question.
You mentioned in reference to the particle board factory that environmental justice was for labor, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the relationship between the labor movement and the environmental justice movement.
Okay. There was a partnership that was developed with 5 or 6 of the environmental justice networks with the OCAW, the Oil Chemical Atomic Workers Union, because, you know, on one side of that, on the labor side, one of the most progressive internationals, very interestingly, was OCAW, and many of those workers inside those plants are producing, manufacturing, in many cases, being impacted in the workplace, and our communities are being impacted surrounding those. If you look at pesticide and the whole elimination of DDT in the U.S., it's still being manufactured in Richmond, California, at the Chevron facility in Richmond. And you know, over 30,000 people were moved out of that African-American Laotian community last year because of a spill, an accident there. So the coming together of labor and environmental justice is crucial. We have a lot in common because many of us work in workplaces, or we want to work in workplaces, so we can't separate then the labor aspect from the environmental or the economic justice impact of it. Now the OCAW has merged with the paper workers, a more conservative union. And if you look at Minnesota, if you look at many of the southeastern states, pulp and paper mills, and many of the kind of problems, both from the workplace and from the community standpoint. So now we're engaged in an alliance with the merge of the OCAW, the Oil Chemical Workers Union, and the paper workers, the steel workers, and many of the others, where I think now this whole jobs versus the environment, not easy, I'm going to tell you something, it's not easy, you know, because a lot of times it's like pumped in so much is that if those folk on that side of the fence get what they want, you're going to close down this facility, and you're going to be out of a job. when you know, even if you take Levi Strauss, you're not on the chemical side, Levi Strauss closed over 20 facilities in the U.S., moved to Costa Rica, to Mexico, and to other locations. It wasn't because of the Levi Strauss boycott, I can guarantee you. I would like to hope maybe it was, because I happen to support the Levi Strauss boycott. But many of those sisters and brothers that worked in those Levi Strauss facilities for 20, 25 years, that was given a 1-month notice of 20 or 25 years dedication to the millions upon billions of dollars that the Haas family made by Levi Strauss, then that ain't about justice, that's about injustice. So it's very important that we come together with labor and community and all these pieces, and we're committed to do that in this movement. I thank you, sister, brother, for those questions. I thank you all again for your time and your patience. I accept my apologies, please, for the shortness of my comments. I want to be respectful to the agenda, and this afternoon, there's workshops this morning and this afternoon, activities where more of this discussion can take place in. And lastly, again, I tell you, this movement is about not just a few of us, it's about all of us. No? And so whether we're white, black, brown, yellow, red, whatever color we may be, it's about building a movement in this country that will say, not only, it's not about we're not going to put up with it no more, but these are the kind of alternative opportunities and proposals and movements that we're going to develop. Thank you all, sisters and brothers, for your time and your contribution.